Coach Robb podcast, answering questions and eliminating frustrations about health, wellness, and performance since 1987.
Welcome to the Coach Robb podcast, the People's Podcast. This is episode number 59. Coach Robb, how you doing today, buddy?
Hey, I am doing great. It's good to see you again, and it's amazing how fast a couple of weeks gets by us, but I'm very, very excited about this conversation that we're going to be looking at today. It's going to be an important one for our listeners.
I was going to say, man, we might have to bump our podcasts up on a weekly basis because I don't know if I could go 2 weeks without seeing you every Friday morning, you know?
Yeah. I totally agree. And especially on these subjects, you know, you and I always try to have a general conversation just amongst ourselves as friends and fellow colleagues. And it's interesting how the things that we want to talk about with the listeners are sitting there right in the mainstream of what you and I are going through as we raise families and try to run businesses and try to train and ride and do the things that we like to do. So it's good. And I'm glad to see you again. And I want to thank all the listeners for carving out some time to either listen to us on the audio or joining us here on YouTube here today.
Yeah, and if you guys are joining us on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe. That helps us out and gets the algorithm going. And we obviously want to grow this show, so make sure you're spreading this to all your family and friends as well. Coach Robb, I think that I don't know if I'm starting to get a little bit of a conscience here, because the first episode that we did was on weight loss, and of course I need to lose some weight. Like I'm a little husky in these winter months out here in California. And then this week's show is how to improve sleep quality, and that really hits home for me because you know I'm busy. I have my business. I've got a day job. I've got a family. I try to do as much riding and stuff as I can, and sleep is tough for me, like it is I think for a lot of people.
Yeah, it really is. And for those of you that were kind enough to listen to our first show, and we talked about an attempt to lose body fat, absolutely good, clean eating is going to be a strong influencing factor. Exercise, particularly low intensity aerobic, adding some strength training to build lean muscle mass, absolutely important. But what my hope is one of the biggest takeaways from the last show was that you understand everything has to be run through the stress variable. We talked about that illustration. If you look at stress coming in 4 categories: personal, professional, athletic, and financial, what are the only 2 things that can offset that bucket of stress? Food and sleep. And so when we look at sleep, one of the challenges that we run into, and I don't know if you've had any challenges with this, but the biggest thing that we run into is we start making some adjustments to our daily schedule so we can go to bed early. And have you ever had one of those nights where you tucked yourself in early and then you laid there and stared at the ceiling fan for 2 hours? That's the frustration that we want to address by looking at what would be causing the inability to sleep. And what I want to do, especially for those that are here on YouTube, I want to share some graphical illustrations so that you can visually see the concept that we're going to be talking about. And stress is right at the top of the problem when it comes to not being able to sleep.
Yeah, and stress is such a big term, right? Because it's not just stress at work or stress with the kids. It's stress can mean so many different things, and we kind of talked about that a little bit on our last podcast on what stress truly is. But if you have that graph, bring that thing up so we can share with the listeners.
Yeah, what I want, especially for those that are listening to this, on a podcast show here, what I want to have you do is visualize a funnel. For those of you that are here with us on YouTube, you're able to actually see this illustration that I'm talking about. When we look at the funnel of stress and the ability to handle it, I want you to, if you're making some notes here, because you're listening to this as an audio, draw a funnel with the smaller end at the bottom and the big spout at the top. And at the top of that, I want you to put in MCT, which is medium chain triglycerides, which is high quality fat. For those that are with us here on YouTube, look at the top of the funnel here. See how we're eating high quality fats? And what that does is essentially it gives the adrenal system. If you're listening to this in audio, you're going to name the funnel your adrenal system. And at the
Coach Robb,
bottom, yes,
real quick, the fats, the good fats. Just give us
yes,
a sample of what that is. What is a good
yep.
fat?
Nope. Thanks for clarifying for the sake of the listeners. A good fat would be something like extra virgin olive oil, avocados, raw coconut, raw nuts, cold water fish like salmon, sardines, the things that have the high omega-3 MCT. MCT is just an acronym for medium chain triglycerides. And the beautiful part about these MCTs is your body can only use them as fuel. What it doesn't use, it will actually pass in the form of waste. So unlike a saturated fat where it goes right into where you have a tendency to hold on to body fat, MCT oils are used for fuel. They're used for what we consider the good oils in the body for like your skin, your hair. For those of you that are watching this on YouTube, look at my fingers here. Imagine this is a nerve ending. And we know when we look back to Biology 101, there should be a conduction in between those two nerves. Well, at the end of each one of those nerves should be covered in adipose tissue, which is fat. So we want to make sure that people don't get fat phobic. You've got to have a percentage of body fat to stay healthy. The internal organs, for those of us that are athletic, you got to remember that your organs are being supported and protected by a layer of fat. So it's never good to have excessive lean body fat percentages because it starts to become detrimental to the body. And that's what's so important about these MCT oils is you've got to make them your primary form of fat that you're taking in. You can grill with it, you can marinate with it, you can put it on salad dressings. And for the illustration, for those that are on YouTube, look right here. These MCTs have to be used as they've got to be supplied to the adrenals. I don't want this to sound sarcastic at all, but look at the bottom of this illustration, and those that are listening on an audio file, at the bottom of your funnel, I want you to write down HGH, human growth hormone, and testosterone. HGH is the natural hormone that makes you lean. Testosterone, yes, it is a very, very powerful sexual hormone. It also plays a significant role in the production of red blood cells. Now, for those of you that are struggling with energy, you may find that you're what we would consider anemic. If you think about a woman on a menstrual cycle, they'll say she's anemic and therefore she has low energy. What they're really, if you get into the just kind of a little bit below the surface, when you are losing blood, you have less and less hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a carrier of oxygen. So look at this illustration, and for those of you that are writing it down, you want to have testosterone released during sleep so that your red blood cell count goes up, and that's going to increase your ability to carry oxygen, which means you'll have more energy. For those of you that are athletic, you're going to be able to go faster, longer before you start to get tired. So step back and think about this illustration. If you're with us here on YouTube, look at this. You want to feed. This is why we talked about food is so important, the right quality of food, high quality fats. The adrenal system gets what it needs, and then it can do its job and excrete HGH and testosterone. So for those of you that were kind enough to join us in our last podcast, this is probably the best illustration I can share with you in regards to why we say that you'll never get lean by exercising. You only get lean by sleeping. And when you get some people that are online that are overzealous and they're like, oh, that's ridiculous. You just got to starve yourself and smash yourself in the gym. It's the exact opposite of that. Because if you don't give your body a chance to literally absorb and recover from the work that you did, it starts to become counterproductive.
And you get that quite a bit, right? You get that from athletes and whatnot that are like, Coach, I'm working out 2 times a day, and and I haven't lost any weight, and I'm doing the work, but they're missing this piece of the pie, and that's the sleep portion.
It's the sleep portion, and it goes back to what we started with this podcast today, and that is stress. That's why I want to make sure that people get comfortable letting those interchange. If you're killing it and you're getting plenty of sleep during the night, but then during the day, you don't like your job, you don't like your partner, you're not making enough money, you go to the gym and you smash yourself, your cup runneth over. The body can only handle, so you cannot handle more than 100% of anything. The problem that you run into is, and that's what makes exercise, in my opinion, so enjoyable, no pun intended, is that when you understand that exercise should become a stress reducer, then if you have stressful things going on in your life personally or professionally, you can say, okay, I'm gonna kind of treat myself to a low intensity workout. I can still lift weights. I'm just not going to smash myself. I can do cardio. I'm just not going to smash myself. And you'll be surprised when you're exercising at a low intensity. I find that I can fix all my other financial, personal, professional. I can't tell you how many businesses I have created in my head while working out, especially when I swim, because there's absolutely no chance I can have a phone. When I'm on a trainer workout and I do have my phone and I'm listening to music, it's easy to grab that phone and be distracted. So if you come back to what we're looking at today, again, I've left this illustration up on the screen for a long period of time on purpose. To your point, Dan, and for those that are writing this off of an audio file, as you label your funnel as the adrenal system, put the adrenal system on one side and then put stress on the other. For those of you that are with us here on YouTube, look at this. When you lay down at night, let's assume that you're getting enough fat, MCT, you're giving yourself enough sleep, 8 to 9 hours. What happens? The body is able to release the hormones that makes you leaner, stronger, which is what everybody desires. And even if you don't consider yourself an athlete, you're going to be more resilient to life's stresses. Now let's go to the other side of this equation. When you're on a no-fat, low-fat diet, you just starved the adrenal system of what it needs to produce what it needs. Stop and think about that. You want hormones at the bottom of the funnel through the adrenals, right? You want the adrenal system to do its job. Well, if you don't give it what it needs, the building blocks, how do you expect something to be created out of nothing? This is why I get so incredibly adamant against people who say, don't eat fruits and vegetables because it has sugar in it. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, because the vitamins and minerals play a significant role in they're what we consider the catalysts of energy. Dan, if you and I were to go camping this weekend with our families, we wouldn't take a match and put it up against a huge log and try to start a fire. We would go collect kindling, leaves, and brush, and we'd get that fire brewing, and then it would eventually get the logs going. Well, that's what fruits and vegetables do. So please don't ever strip those out of your diet unless you find that you've got a severe allergic reaction to them. But if we come back to this illustration here, let's look at the other side of the equation. Somebody eating a no-fat, low-fat diet, their stress is through the roof, and then they go and they exercise and add even more stress to the system. Well, now we get the production of what's called cortisol. And we're going to talk about cortisol quite a bit today. Cortisol has gotten a little bit of a bad rap, justifiably so, but it also has a good attribute to it. And let me elaborate on it. When you're looking at cortisol, we have something that's known as the circadian rhythm. So when you go to bed at night, if we were to take a saliva test and look at the cortisol in your blood, right, or in your system rather, your cortisol level should be at its lowest right before you go to bed. This is why you should be naturally sleepy and you should be able to fall asleep quickly. As you go through the night and your body rejuvenates itself, the cortisol levels should naturally rebuild, and it becomes actually an arousal hormone. It's what wakes you up without an alarm. We always, with our clients, we refer to this as the vacation test. Go to bed when you're tired, wake up when you're rested. And how many hours is that? And it goes back in an indirect way. When you go to bed knowing that you don't have to wake up tomorrow, it's amazing how the quality of sleep improves. We're back to that little nagging category known as stress. I got to get up early to an alarm, got to go to a job I don't like, not making enough money. You see how this starts to have a snowball effect.
It's funny because, on the weekends, right, when I intend to sleep in, like I'm going to get a little extra rest, I'm had a long week, I tend to get up way earlier than I do during the week, and I think that's what the reason. But I personally have a very, very hard time getting to bed. When I lay down, like you talked about, staring at the ceiling, one thing that I am horrible with, and I think you can probably agree, but being on my phone before I go to bed, or watching TV probably doesn't help. But for me, I guess my cortisol levels would be like off, because at night I'm like raring to go. I have trouble falling asleep. Why is that?
Literally, we program our bodies to do what we want. Our brain is pretty powerful. we start to get very, very tired. What do? We start hitting caffeine. We start getting tired. What do? We hit nicotine. We hit stimulants. And this is why you see such a high level of obesity with first responders, because they're going to bed when they should be awake, and they're going to work when they should be going to sleep. And it literally throws the circadian rhythm completely out of sync. And I'm glad you bring that up, because if you're somebody who's listening to this and you don't have a night, you don't work at night, and you're putting on a tremendous amount of weight, now you know why. Because stress is causing the body to produce cortisol. This is where I want to clarify cortisol. I just talked about the good side of cortisol. It's a natural hormone that you find in your body. It should gradually decline during the day. When you're ready to go to bed, it should be at its lowest level. And then as you sleep and you give your body a chance to rejuvenate itself, cortisol levels should be at its highest in the morning, and you have the energy to start your day. Now let's go to the other side of when you almost get in a car accident. You know how you hear the tires screech and you get that flushed feeling that comes over you? That's that fight or flight that we've heard about numerous times. Well, that flushed feeling, that's cortisol dumping into the bloodstream.
Interesting.
What we don't realize is we're kind of like a little dripping water. We go to our job that we don't like, cortisol is dripping in on it, not a good level. And you say, well, wait, isn't cortisol naturally in the blood? Yes, but remember, when you're at a job that you really have a disdain for, you're essentially in an all-day car wreck. It's just dripping. You go home to a partner that you don't like, or it's a very tumultuous environment. The faucet just opened up a little bit more. So now you've had a bad day at work. You don't like it. Come home to someone that you don't really like. Environment's less than ideal. You keep seeing the stack of bills that are on the counter. Finances aren't killing it. Now your valve is just getting opened wider and wider. And then Dan, not that I'm not insinuating you're in a bad relationship, hate your job and all that, but you said it yourself. You laid down at night and then you're staring at the ceiling fan. Your stress bucket is running over. I don't know where it's from. I know you personally. You've got a beautiful wife and a family. You love your day job and all. So then I look at it and I go, okay, is it because when you exercise, you're smashing yourself? And you go, no. Well, okay. Then I start talking to you and you're like, well, I'm thinking about buying another business. I'm thinking about starting another. Okay, well, at least we found the catalyst for why you can't turn your brain. That's not a bad thing. That's why you're successful.
So just because your brain, you know, like you said, I love my job. I love my business. I don't feel like the stress during the day, right? But are you saying that at night, like when I lay down, that's when I start to think, you know, like my brain just doesn't shut off. So is that the stress that's the cortisol dumping into my bloodstream from me just thinking about stuff? I mean,
yeah, it's a great question. It isn't causing you to think, but your thinking is causing the cortisol levels to go up because you're driving your stress up. Let me share with you guys, for those of you that are with us on YouTube, let me share with you a report that we work with our athletes. This is on the Garmin platform. For those of you that may not have seen this before, this is called Garmin Connect. And what I always strive for with my clients is to have a stress score that's less than 25. Now, in the case, if this, like with this athlete, for those of you that are on an audio file, what I've got is a 7-day snapshot of the stress level that Garmin consolidates all kinds of biofeedback variables to give a number that says the sum total of your stress today, personally, professionally, financially, athletically, is, in this case, my athlete is sitting at 29. Now, I can tell you that this 29 is a day of speed work. This is a professional athlete. We did speed work. We are okay with this. This is where we look at the law of averages, okay? If you come in here, Dan, and you start seeing it trick up, we don't want to just go 3 or 4 months and go, guess what? We've got a lot of stress in our system and do nothing about it. The important part, that's why I love the Garmin heart rate platform, is, and Dan, what you said is so incredibly important for our listeners. You have literally taken on more and more stress as an adult to the point that you're desensitized to the amount of stress that you're dealing with. And I want all the listeners to think about what you do during the day. And if you took somebody fresh out of high school and you dropped them into what you do, they would absolutely freak out. Moms, particularly those who have small children, think about all of the things that you're juggling to get them fed, keep them clean, all the things that you guys do personally and professionally, right? You just get it done. Well, that becomes your new norm. And it's almost like you've gotten desensitized to the amount of stress that your system is under. And it's exactly why I use the Garmin platform, because it's outside the scope of today's webinar together. But Garmin is looking at skin temperature. It's looking at heart rate. It's looking at how much time you're up. Is it like, for example, Dan, if you are normally awake for, say, 16 hours a day, and all of a sudden you're up for 20, the heart rate monitor will actually pick that up and add it to your stress score, because it realizes that you're outside the norm of your typical day. These watches and these platforms are very intuitive, and the more you wear them, the more accurate and precise they become. Let's go back to what you said. You're laying down at night. You're not thinking because you have high stress, because you have high cortisol levels, but because you're thinking about all the things that you may be behind on, or, again, you have to almost use a negative example to get the point across. Well, now your heart starts racing, and you'll notice that you lay down and your heart rate's at 60. You start thinking about this or that, or something you forgot to do today. You told somebody you were going to get them a proposal, and you're like, oh, goodness. Well, now you're having a parent-teacher conference. Do I get up and send that proposal? Or because you know how this is, and I want all the listeners to think about this. Do not, under any circumstance, think about a pink cow with black spots. Don't think about a pink cow with black spots. And a lot of our listeners have heard me use that illustration before. Here's where it's relevant to what you're going through when you're laying down, though, Dan. You're saying, don't forget tomorrow morning, I got to send that proposal to Rob. So what do? You start kind of rousing yourself. You're getting all fired up. You're like, don't forget. So what I do with my clients is I always have a spiral notebook next to the bed, so you can just offload those thoughts. Notice I didn't say my phone, because what you said earlier is very important. The light on that phone is going to stimulate your brain. There's all kinds of studies out there saying the last 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed, no TV, no computer, no phone. And there's a tremendous amount of merit to it. So what I say is, you're an entrepreneur. You don't want to give up that idea. Write it down on a piece of paper, and at least tomorrow morning when you wake up, and I've seen this happen so many times, as soon as you write that down and your brain files, okay, that good idea is not going to slip through my fingers, the body goes, okay, we can go to bed now.
Interesting.
Now, for you, it's tough because you do have a lot of hats that you wear, but so do all of our listeners. Like you and I always say, you and I don't live in a glass house. We have families and companies and things like that. So I want to come back full circle, though. If you look at what we've talked about so far today, where does stress come from? Personal, professional, financial, or athletic? What does stress do to the body? It can either stimulate it for improvement and growth, because working out with the right balance of intensity and duration is productive. Unfortunately, when you make working out too hard or too long, it tips the scale. You drive stress up. You go to your work, your day job is hard. Maybe you enjoy it, maybe you don't. Maybe it's long hours, maybe it's physically demanding. And then for some reason, this is where, Dan, you have always amazed me. You've become so desensitized to how much you do in a day that you go, well, I'm going to keep that volume up, and I'm going to go ahead and start riding my bicycle for 60 minutes a day. And then I'm going to ride moto 3 days a week. And your body's going, where are you going to get that energy from? Because think about it, for those that ride moto, as much as we would love it, we don't get to just roll out of bed and go ride. Got to pack our bag, got to prep the bike, got to load the bike, drive. Even if you own your own facility and you can ride out your backyard, you still have to prep your bike, still have the laundry to do afterwards. You got to clean the bike, you got to re-grease and do all that we do. There's a lot of pieces and parts. You've only got 24 hours in a day. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to come across at the very beginning of today's conversation is today's webinar is about sleeping through the night. Why can't you sleep through the night? Stress. So that's what I wanted to make sure, there's these resources in regards to, well, how do I evaluate stress? Garmin provides that for you. Let me share the screen real quick, Dan, before we move on. Yeah. Because we get this question quite often. Well, what about sleep? How do I know if I'm getting enough sleep? Well, this is a screenshot of one of my clients. Again, just like you and I, Dan, family man, runs a business. I want you to, for those of you that are running the Garmin platform, you can find this directly on your app on your phone. When you open up your app, scroll down to the bottom and look at your 7-day averages and click on sleep, not sleep score, but sleep. And what I want you to do is scroll below this bar chart. And this is where we look at what we refer to as sleep ratios. We even talked about this in the last podcast together, Dan. So what we're looking for is, remember I said to you, you want to get at least 2 hours of deep sleep, or I should rephrase that. Our goal is to get 2 hours of deep sleep. This right here is a 7-day average. The other variable on the sleep ratio is how much time are you awake during the night? How many times do you get up to use the restroom? Or in your case, Dan, how many times do you wake yourself up thinking about something and then you're awake for an hour? You might be in bed for 9, but you're awake for an hour. These two ratios, in my experience, has been the most important two numbers. For those of you that are listening to this in an audio file, on your Garmin, walk through what I just said. Go to your 7-day averages on your landing page, click on sleep, go to the bottom of the bar chart and look at the top left-hand corner. What's your average deep sleep and what's your wake time? And of course, we always want to look at the bottom left. What is your total? So in a perfect scenario, Dan, 8 to 9 hours, 2 hours of deep sleep. My goal was less than 10 minutes a night awake. So this really goes back into the whole idea of, don't just tell me, Rob, I need to sleep. How much sleep do I need to get? 8 to 9 hours would be ideal. Don't just tell me I need to reduce stress. How do I know if, and again, especially for those that are over the age of 40, you are completely desensitized to how much stress you're under because you've been doing it now for 20, 25 years. And that's what I want to be the very first takeaway for the first half of this show tonight is I want to make sure people understand, please don't browbeat yourself. And I'm not, again, Dan, you and I both are not fluffy snowflake type of people here. That is not what we're insinuating, but we have to keep reality in check here. Please, if your cup is running over, you're finding that you're not sleeping. By the way, if you find that you don't have an appetite, if you find that you don't have a sex drive, if you find that you're not motivated, if you find that you're excessively grumpy, how many more signs that you're overstressed? But mainstream media and Google will make an excuse for everything you're going through. If you have no sex drive, it's because you're not 20 anymore. If you can't sleep through the night, Dan, you can't turn your brain off. There's always a lame excuse for everything.
It's funny you say that too, because, you see some of these commercials and you see these ads on Instagram and YouTube, if you can't sleep, here's this sleep aid or, melatonin or whatever it is. If you got a low sex drive, oh, you need testosterone. Here, take these shots. It's like these companies always have this gimmick, right? For any of these little things that we face on a daily basis. One of the guys back in the day always said, man, always get back to the basic fundamentals of life, right? And we forget that we could do these and they're free. This is all free. It takes changing your habits, I guess. And I'm guilty of it. I think a lot of us are guilty of it in some respect. But
you just said something really important. Let me bring, for the sake of those that are with us here on YouTube, let's bring this video or bring this illustration back up real quick, Dan. And the thing that I want people to understand, let me see here. I thought I had picked it up here. Let me make sure I got the right illustration here. Can you see this okay, Dan? You got the funnel in front of you?
Yep.
Okay, for those that are on YouTube, look at this right here. Dan, what you just said is the $1 million statement. When somebody says to you that you need to get on TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, look down here at the bottom. What is supposed to be excreted out of your adrenals at night when you're feeding yourself high quality fat? You're giving yourself 8 to 9 hours of quality sleep. What is the hormone that we said is going to be excreted? Testosterone. What's the strongest sex hormone in the body? Testosterone. So when you made the comment about get back to the fundamentals, eat, reduce stress, get adequate amounts of sleep, guess what? You'll be a raging Cajun stallion out there. And by the way, just for those who may be new to us, I want you to write this down. If you've never heard me talk about this before, there's 4 external signs of adrenal fatigue. You see a theme here tonight? 4 signs of adrenal fatigue. Number 1, you're craving simple sugars. Like you're a crack addict, you need sugar. Number 2, you have night sweats. Number 3, you're tired and you can't go to sleep. And number 4 is a little to no sex drive whatsoever. Well, if you have night sweats, they say you're premenopausal. Your hormones are out of whack somewhere. If you're craving simple sugars, it's just that time of the month, or you just have a sweet tooth. Dan, you just said it yourself. If you can't sleep, it's because you can't turn your brain off. And if you don't have a sex drive, it's because you're not 20 anymore. And I find that very interesting. Now, I've got clients that are on TRT because they went through Complete Med Solutions. They found out that they're at a hormonal level, they're at a deficit. Parts of the system aren't firing the way they're supposed to. We have a couple solutions for that that are 100% natural, but you've got to make sure that it's legitimately necessary, not just run into it. As you said, Dan, if you're going to step over $1 to pick up a penny, when all you got to do is eat high quality fat and get 8 to 9 hours of sleep and turn your negative symptoms around, that's really where you need to start. Now, if you've been doing that for 6 months to a year and you're still feeling those symptoms, absolutely. Your blood work. That's why we partnered with Complete Med Solutions, because it does legitimately strip the emotion out of that. The idea here is your body produces what it needs. And I know this is going to sound crazy, Dan. If you hired me to build a 2-story house and I only showed up with enough building materials to build a 1-story house, why are you surprised that I can't build you 2 stories when I only brought enough materials for 1? Well, how do you expect the adrenal system to produce what we refer to it as excreting, right? The hormonal system excretes hormones. The body can't produce the necessary hormones unless it has the ingredients to build the hormone. The ingredients have to be met with rest and relaxation, and the body does it during the night. It releases the growth hormone, which makes you lean. By the way, for those that are athletes, that's the hormone that allows you to recover, human growth hormone, HGH for short, and it produces red blood cells through the production of testosterone. If you can't get that morning erection, that production of testosterone may change your outlook on everything. But it's not, and I can't emphasize this enough. You can tell me and you can show me your Garmin dashboard and you're getting 8 hours of sleep. Well, are you getting the right ratios? If you're not getting the right ratios, you're not getting enough food. We talked about this last week on calorie gap, very important. Because remember, if you're not eating enough calories, what'd you do? You just increased your stress. If you're not staying hydrated, you increased your stress. If you're not getting enough sleep, you're increasing your stress. Job, personal, finances, athletic. You see where we're going. Now it's just, it is snowballing. And then you don't eat enough food, building block, and you don't get enough sleep, quality and quantity. And you wonder why you've put on 25 pounds since high school. And I've said this in the last show, and I'm going to reiterate it here because it's relevant. We have had people that have come to us, particularly in the running category, where they were under the tutelage of another coach. The other coach was a high mileage, high intensity coach, and the athlete actually gained body fat training for a marathon, running almost 100 miles a week. Now, I've used that illustration before, but I hope, whether you consider yourself an athlete or not, how in the world can you gain body fat training for a marathon, running 75 to 100 miles a week? Too much stress. Remember what we talked about. Cortisol is a byproduct of the fight or flight. So when you're undernourished, underhydrated, not getting enough sleep, you're going to pack on body fat. Doesn't matter if you're eating 11 almonds and 13, pieces of lettuce. It isn't going to matter if your stress is runneth over. And it's so incredibly important.
I wanted to clarify something also. These folks that have gone and gotten the testosterone therapy, these are people that truly qualify for it, correct? I mean, these are people that we've analyzed their sleep pattern, their sleep quality. We've analyzed their diet. We've come to the determination that they have done everything in their power to correct this testosterone issue, which didn't correct it. So then they needed to get the therapy. Am I correct?
You're 100% correct. Like if you contacted Complete Med Solutions and you just said, I want to get on TRT treatment. Like I said, we have a natural product that we do suggest, and it does work extremely well. But it's kind of like me owning my own supplement business. I don't want people on supplements. And people go, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, it does. You only need to supplement if you can't get enough of the food in to get yourself into a healthy range. If you can't get enough food in, then yes, supplementation would make sense. Let's say that you can't get enough amino acids to rebuild your muscles and support your immune system. Then a high quality whey protein with maybe some almond milk and some berries and stuff and make yourself a smoothie. Yes, that would. The key takeaway is when I make a comment, I have a supplement company, but I don't want you to take them, should be a red light to get your attention, because think about what supplementation means, complementing real food, particularly for those who are listening who have young athletes. What they'll hear is, oh, I don't have to eat a high quality piece of meat because I can just drink a milkshake. That doesn't work. We want to start with real raw food first and foremost, and then we supplement, hence the word, on top of healthy eating, excuse me, both on the quality and the quantity side. We talked a lot about this last week. Calorie gap has to be bridged.
Before we get into how exactly we improve our sleep quality, I wanted to ask you about something. For those of us that have the luxury from time to time to lay down during the day and take a little siesta, does that help? Is that good? Does that interrupt the cortisol, cycle? Like, can you talk a little bit about naps?
Absolutely. Along that thread of thought, let me open up another illustration real quick. Give me just a half a second. To answer your question, naps are absolutely unbelievably beneficial. And I will share my screen here. When you're looking at, let me make sure this pops up here. So when you're looking at this is, again, directly off of the Garmin dashboard. You'll notice right here that this athlete went to bed at 1:13. And what we want to do is see how quickly they get into deep sleep. Remember the ratios that we were talking about, Dan?
Yep.
We were looking at the ratio between deep sleep and the awake time. So when I'm looking at somebody's sleep information, what I want to take a look at is what time did they fall asleep? And how quickly did they get into deep sleep? So let's take a look. This is a little bit more realistic. For those of you, I hope that the computer screen, for those that are on an audio file, I'll walk you through it. So this athlete went to bed at 11:30. And what I'm doing is I'm sliding my mouse across to find out how long does it take for the athlete to get into deep sleep. Dan, it's real important that we don't confuse the listeners, because when we talk about deep sleep, for those of you that have studied sleep research at all, deep sleep is also known as REM-3. REM is just an acronym for rapid eye movement. REM-1, rejuvenate your brain. REM-3 is deep sleep. That's where your body releases hormone.
Is there a REM-2?
REM-2 is transitional. Great question. REM-2 is transitional. It's exactly what it insinuates. You're just transitioning from phase 1 to 3 and back to 1. Nothing physiological comes out of REM-2. So that's why, as a company, I only focus on deep sleep and the awake time, because we assume that the rest of the quality is there, rejuvenating the brain. But as we've talked about here today, what most of us are missing is the production of the hormones that allows us to recover. Because when we use the word recover, I want, by the end of today's webinar, I want people to rephrase their brain. When we say recover from stress, not just recover from working out, or just recover from a vacation, or recover from work, or dealing with your kid's soccer coach. All the stress combined, you've got to be able to recover from it. So let's go back to your question about the benefit of a nap, because what we're looking at is, we want to remember how we talked about the dark blue is the deep sleep, and that's where the hormones released. If I've got an individual like yourself, Dan, and you can lay down at, let's say 11:30, and if you guys can see this on your screen here, this athlete was literally in deep sleep 11 minutes after he put his head down on the pillow. Can you see that okay, Dan?
Yeah, that is amazing. I'm jealous of this individual.
Okay, now let's take it one step further. For those that are listening on audio, go to your Garmin, go to last night's sleep, and just put your finger on your Garmin on your screen on your phone and hold your finger down, and it'll bring up a timestamp. Just slide it over for where it goes from when you went to bed to when it got to dark blue. Because Dan, your comment was very benign, but it has a lot of meat on the bone. Number one, if you're somebody that takes an hour to fall asleep into deep sleep, you're going to tell me that naps are completely useless for you. And you're correct. Why? because you don't fall asleep. You just lay there. If you take somebody like this that can get to sleep in 10 to 11 minutes, absolutely a 30, 40, 50, 60-minute power nap is going to drop this testosterone and HGH. So for the listeners, think about this. If you give me one nap a week, I get 8 days of HGH and testosterone in 7 days. Bingo. But you can go and look at, for those of you that are on an audio file, go to your sleep from last night and look at a couple days here. For those that are with us on YouTube, I'll go back another day here. Same individual. So he went to bed at 10:53. And in this case, it took him about 25, 7 to 11. So it took him 19 minutes to get into deep sleep. So a 1 hour power nap for somebody with this kind of history. Remember I said earlier, Dan, what I love about the Garmin platform is the more you wear the watch, the more accurate it creates data about you.
Right.
So, and I love your question, is, like I said, as benign as it seemed, I'll have people that will vouch to me up and down, Rob, if I take a nap, it doesn't work. With the heart rate data and with the sleep data, I can help you figure out why it doesn't work. Now, you made a comment that you may not realize has so much value for our listeners. And I hope the listeners understand we don't queue up the entire conversation. We like this to be an organic conversation because we both are athletes and we both have families, and so do our listeners. Think about it this way. If I can get you to see the benefit, i.e. testosterone and HGH, you now see the value of a nap. If you can get into that deep sleep within less than an hour and you can give yourself a 2-hour nap, you just gave yourself an extra dose of HGH and testosterone, which we just talked about, right? What about the listener who goes, well, that's great for you guys, but I can't fall asleep quickly? This is where we use our food log analysis to find out. Remember, I talked to you off the air. We always want to track when you eat something, what is your mental clarity 20 minutes later?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we now realize is if you've eaten something and you're sleepy within that 20-minute window, well, guess what just happened? You now have a good idea of what foods don't work for you. And now you can use that to put yourself to sleep when you're getting ready to take a nap or go to bed at night. Don't take that out of context. If you know you've got a 2-hour block to take a nap, it's okay to eat some foods that makes you naturally sleepy. You wouldn't want to do that when you're getting ready to go into a big meeting or start an athletic training or a race. But on the flip side, if you're finding yourself, Dan, you mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, if you're struggling to fall asleep, find the foods that makes you sleepy. Eat a bowl of cereal. People go, oh, it's just junk food. It's just, I'm not saying eat Captain Crunch, but eat something that's got some. Yeah, exactly. Well, in all fairness, why would I not recommend the Captain Crunch? Because it probably is going to give you diarrhea because it's not an item that you normally eat. So I don't mind looking at both sides of the equation. But if you can find a cereal, or I'll tell you my personal one, confessing here, what I actually use is I use old-fashioned rolled oats, and I'll add raisins. That's what I eat for breakfast. But I have found that if I put a little bit of brown sugar in it, I don't know why, but for me, brown sugar puts me asleep. So if I'm having a hard time falling asleep, I'll do a small bowl of rolled oats. So I'm getting the fiber, I'm getting the good carbohydrates. I use organic raisins. So I get the potassium out of those. And then I put that little bit of brown sugar with some warm whole milk. And for whatever reason, within 15 minutes, I'm out like a baby. Now, that's what I have found has worked for me. I hope the listeners will, do some self-experimenting, document what you eat, see if it makes you sleepy, and then keep that back in for yourself, Dan. Keep that in the back of your mind when you can't fall asleep. Go run and use it, because now you get to use it to your advantage.
And I'm sure that we'll cover the food log on an upcoming podcast at some point. But if you guys, I have done this in the past. Just start writing down what you're eating. And keep track of, how you, like Coach Robb said, how you feel 20 minutes after. Are you tired? Do you have energy? Does it upset your stomach? Like you will discover so much about yourself by doing that. But this all rolls up to the sleep thing. And Coach Robb, I guess I hadn't thought about that.
And let me share my screen. Let me share my screen a quick again, because I want to share something with those that run the Garmin platform. And for those of you that are listening to this as an audio file, I apologize because this can be a little bit harder for me to be able to walk through this. For those of you that use the Garmin Connect, where I'm at is on the left-hand side of the screen. I'm on the second icon down, which is the blue heart called Health Stats. Open that drop-down box and click on calories in and out. And you're going to notice if you don't have your MyFitnessPal already up on your phone, I would encourage you to download MyFitnessPal. And when you go to the App Store, it's going to say MyFitnessPal by Under Armour, because Under Armour did buy it. The reason why I bring it up in the context of what you just said, Dan, is if you are keeping track of the food that you're eating, you mentioned keeping a food log. Let's make it even easier for our listeners. You can do it digitally. If you've got MyFitnessPal on your phone, you can come right here, and with one touch of the button, you could connect your MyFitnessPal to your Garmin. And then what it helps you be able to do is it helps you bridge the big question about, well, how many calories do I need to consume? So for those of you that are watching us here on YouTube, you'll notice this is a calorie burn chart based on you, the athlete, or you, the individual, wearing the watch. So don't see what I don't like is when you get trainers are like, you need to eat this amount of calories. That's complete nonsense. Dan, you're 3 inches taller than I am. Your shoulders are broader than mine. You're going to tell me that your and I's calorie demands are going to be the same just to stay alive? We refer to those as basal caloric needs. No. Listeners need to find out what their calorie needs are. So for those of you that are listening to this in an audio file on the Garmin dashboard, or even on your phone, just go and look at what your calorie burn rate was. And you can go to your landing page, go to calories, and you can toggle on the top right-hand corner. You can change whether it's 1, 7, or 4 weeks. If you're on the computer, you just saw us here on YouTube show you how to do it. But here's the takeaway as well, though, Dan. What people also have to understand is when you understand what that calorie burn rate is, and you understand how that you can track with MyFitnessPal and you bridge the gap, it goes right back to our last webinar about reducing stress in the system, because you've bridged that calorie gap. Running a caloric deficiency is more stressful on the body than people realize. And if we go back to what we started today about, we've got to offset stress. Calorie restricted is only going to add to your stress. And now weighs us to how, if my body's under stress in all 4 quadrants of life, and then I'm trying to lay down at night and then I can't sleep, I want to make sure that people understand a concept. And Dan, I refer to this as the hierarchy of needs. So at this point in the webinar, I hope everybody's understanding the impact of stress, the importance of managing it, the importance of protecting sleep quality and quantity, understanding the value of high quality fats in your diet. You put all those together, what do you get? You wake up tomorrow morning rested physically and mentally. You have the growth hormone and the recovery hormone, HGH, and you have more red blood cells because of the testosterone production, which actually increases hemoglobin. That's the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. Now think about that, Dan. You eat high quality fats that your body can will only use or lose. Those high quality fats are feeding the adrenals. You're complementing the food with adequate sleep, quality and quantity. The body naturally excretes testosterone and HGH. You just woke up more refreshed and leaner. How much sweat equity did that take?
None.
And that's why I get so doggone irritated when I hear people going out and they're, particularly on social media, so-called influencers. There's an agenda. I have nothing to sell you. I didn't create physiology. I didn't create nutrition. But through my experience at the Olympic Training Center and through my studies in school, I'm telling you the truth on how it works. And you can try to outfox it all you want. People have done it for years, and there's companies that have made billions of dollars off of deception. The weight loss industry is designed to fail. And we're about to talk about something that I hope is going to be a huge epiphany for everybody. And it comes back to the subject that I just mentioned, which is hierarchy of needs. I want everybody who's listening to this, and Dan, I know your little girl's it wasn't that long ago she was itty bitty, but she's not anymore. Stop and think about when you have a 3-month-old child and you give him or her a bath and they're all nice and clean, but they haven't eaten in 5 hours. They're 3 months old, right? And you get them all tucked up and you put them in bed. What is that child going to do all night long?
Sleep like a baby.
With no food?
Oh, no. Yeah, no, with food they do.
That's okay. That's why I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you. And again, I hope the listeners see that we don't have anything that's scripted here. When did the rules change? We would never think about not feeding a 3-month-old baby. We don't mind doing the bath, but we just decide tonight we're not going to feed it. And then that baby cries all night long. And we go, well, of course, you idiot. You haven't fed the child. Here's where I want our listeners to back up a little bit. This is where hierarchy of needs comes in. Until we satisfy appetite, you will never go to sleep. We've already talked about deep sleep and its benefits. We've already talked about the importance of it. We've talked about the hours of sleep. You'll never get there until you satisfy appetite. Now, I know I'm going to piss a lot of people off on this one, and I'm ready for it. Bring it on, because I want to have an adult conversation. If you have questions about this, leave a comment. Let's get into an adult dialogue. There is not an internal timer in your lip that goes, oh, it's 9 a.m. I'll use that as fuel. Oh, it's 9 p.m. I'm going to pack that on as fat. Your body has its own internal calculation that says, I've burnt X amount. I need X amount to recover. If you don't give it to it, let's go to those who, Dan, obviously you and I have a background in motorcycle racing, and I think a lot of our listeners do as well. Let's go into the mechanical world. If I don't run enough oil in a motor and I expose that to a lot of elevation change and a lot of excessive heat, are we surprised that the motor grenades? Nope, we're not. If we run the radiator at half capacity because we're going to save some weight and we over smoke the engine, are we surprised that we grenaded the engine? No. Will we build a modded motor and put a smaller radiator on it? No, we put an oversized radiator, right? We mod the system and we adjust all of its elements. When you go to bed at night, you need to embrace that you've got to support sleep. The average individual, this is just based off of 37 years of doing this, the average individual has dinner no later than, well, on average, around 7 p.m. If you go from 7 p.m. until 7 a.m., that's 12 hours. Can you imagine, Dan, today you go from noon and no food because you're awake, right? You go 12 hours. You would be so grumpy, so irritable. But yet we think if we go to bed, if we eat dinner at 7, we can get up at 6:30, 7 in the morning, go to the gym, go to the track, do our workouts, go to the races, whatever we want to do. Excuse me? Why does a 3-month-old have to be fed to sleep through the night? How fast does an infant grow? Extremely quickly.
Very.
Yes. And then you look at that. When did we cross that line where all of a sudden now we go from, as a child, because you would never take a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 10-year-old and put them to bed without food. You would never go during the day. You would never take your kids to a theme park and not feed them, right? Because they would be grumpy, low blood sugar, they become grumpy. You would definitely, and we've all seen it, we've paid all this money to go to the theme park, so we're going to be busy, busy, busy. What does everybody like, kind of the old family circus cartoon? What's everybody like in 3 or 4 days? They're not sleeping enough, they're not eating enough, and everyone's at each other's crawl. Well, I want our listeners to take away out of this webinar today, you've got to satisfy appetite before you go to bed to feed the body what it needs, satisfy appetite, so it can do its bodily functions, recover physically and mentally, excrete the hormone that makes you naturally leaner, increases red blood cells, increases your sexual hormones. Now, guess what? You're leaner and stronger and faster tomorrow than you were today, not even worrying about the exercise that you did. But if we don't satisfy appetite before we go to bed, that is the biggest mistake. Now, I'm 55. I'm going on 55 years old this year. Okay. I understand hormones change, but that's why I encourage you guys to look at the intensity of training that you're doing, look at the duration of training, and where does it fit in your stress levels? That's something, Dan, that you and I talk about all the time, especially with some of the vet riders. Some of in the triathlon world, they refer to them as masters athletes. Running world, they refer to them as masters. In the two-world world, they call them the vet riders. We have it the hardest because, yes, we have age kind of working against us, but we don't buy into the Coca-Cola syrup. We're determined we're going to turn those symptoms around. How do you do it? You better start sleeping more and you better start eating more. Now, on the mainstream media, what do they tell you? You got to starve yourself and you got to smash yourself in the gym. Go, 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 go. And that's what I want to leave our listeners with today is it's like, no, you need that. This is where we want to get into the 4 specific things that you need to do. So if you look at what we talked about for the majority of the show, and then we end the show by saying, look, you've got to satisfy appetite, you got to protect sleep, goes back to off the cusp of what we said in the last show. You got to be properly hydrated, properly fed, adequate amount of sleep, and you've got to manage stress. There's no 2 ways around it, Dan. No matter what people want to try to sell you, remember, look behind the closed door, follow the money, follow the suggestions here.
Yeah.
It's literally that simple. And I don't want that to be condescending or sound snide at all, but it kills me how this weight loss industry, and like you said, now with the sleep aids and everything else, it's bad news. And it doesn't need to be.
It's funny, just share a quick story. I have a friend that bought these colonic shakes, where, it's this weight loss diet shake thing. You drank them for 3 days. That's all you do. And you lose all this weight, right?
Yeah.
Well, it worked. She lost some weight, but then immediately gained the weight back.
Yep.
And was bummed that she spent, and they were really expensive, but she spent all this money on these shakes, and then they didn't work. But you said it, follow the money and get back to the basics, control the things that you can control. If you legitimately have a issue with HGH or testosterone or anything like that, after you have followed the process and the recipe, then, you go down the road of getting some help. But these are basic things that we can all control. And
we said this in our last podcast, our mantra in our offices are keep it simple and sustainable. You just hit the nail on the head. People think unless they drop a boatload of money, it must not work. And they get duped into it once, twice, and the companies are making boatloads of money. But if you notice, a lot of those programs aren't around anymore. You don't have the P90X, you don't have the Insanity. I know there was a class action lawsuit, but all they did was just rebrand it as Beachbody. Where'd Zone and Atkins and South Beach and all the quote unquote diets go? We used to count grams, then we counted blocks, then we counted macros. Where did it all go? And that's why I teased you in the last show. I think I'm going to come up with a program where you're not allowed to breathe oxygen, you're not allowed to eat food, you're not allowed to sleep, and you're not allowed to drink water. And I'll probably be on Oprah Winfrey as a millionaire in a month because it's so ridiculously out there that for whatever reason, people buy it. Yeah. And you bring up a good point. The food that I'm asking you to eat is simply in the perimeter of the store. I'm not making any money on that. The exercise that I'd prefer you to stay focused on is low intensity, reduce oxidative stress. You already have a stressed out system. Why are you going to start adding high intensity interval training and stress a system that's already stressed? In a mechanical world, nobody would do that. Nobody would take a motor that shows excessive wear and tear and put it in a very a lot of elevation change under a lot of load. Nobody would do it in a mechanical world. But we think as humans, we can. No, we can't.
Yeah.
So it almost is so simple. People think, oh, they've got to dismiss it but what I do love, and I say this very humbly, I've worked with over 30,000 individuals that have had success. The ones that pulled the parachute, and I'm not gloating on this, every single person that ever pulled the parachute on my program always crashed and burned when they left. If I go into the athletics, an athlete that leaves us for a high intensity, very high volume, high intensity smash fest, have either gotten burnout or gotten injured or both. So I had an athlete that I took that was a mid-pack triathlete. I got him to what we refer to in the triathlon world as an all-American ranking. He was ranked top 10 in the country. He left me, went to another coach, and that coach in 1 year ruined him. Within 1 year, he actually had to have his entire femoral area, his groin, they had to open it up and lay all the parts on the table because he was having all kinds of blood restrictions. What am I supposed to say? I told you so. When I have a young athlete whose parents fire me because I'm not smashing their son to get them hyper lean in a short period of time because I know it's not sustainable, and then that athlete crashes and burns, what am I supposed to say? I told you so. That's uncool. It's unethical. All I can do is empower people with the information. And I hope and pray that they use it to their advantage. Because if you look at the way that we set up our business model, I don't hide information. I don't hold it. I don't hold info at a ransom for money. You know what I mean? It's like the supplements. Don't buy them unless you need them. Now, when you buy them, they're expensive, but they're the highest quality I could find. Our sports drink is expensive because there's no artificial fillers or colors. It doesn't make me, ooh, you're a good guy. If you're going to trust me, I'm going to make sure I get you the right stuff in your hands, just like Garmin. I don't make money on Garmin. I'm not a paid brand ambassador from them. You know, what I want is if you're going to invest in a heart rate monitor, I want to get you a monitor that's easy for you to use and interpret. That's why we have all the videos that we do. So, man, this is a good one, Dan. I really appreciate
it. I'm hoping the next one that we do doesn't hit so close to home, so it makes me feel a little bit better. But no, this is awesome. This is great stuff. I think whether you're a high performing athlete or just an average Joe, one of us or all of us can find something in this conversation that we can clean up and maybe get some better sleep. And Coach Robb, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us your expertise and experience with sleep. And thank you guys all for joining us on episode 51 of the Coach Robb podcast.
Thank you, everybody. Much appreciate your time and attention. And like I said, feel free to leave us any questions that you may have below. And like Dan said earlier, please let other people know about our shows. We would greatly appreciate it. We'll see you again soon.
One last thing, Coach Robb.
Yes.
If you guys find success in what we do and what we talk about on these podcasts, please share with us. Send Coach Robb an email. You can send me an email, share it in the comments section of the YouTube. But we always hear the bad, right? We always hear what didn't work, but we rarely hear what works. So if something's working for you guys, please share with us because we enjoy that feedback.
Absolutely. And remember, this is a community. These are people that want the truth about knowledge and in a sensible approach to it. So to Dan's point, you can reach our team at contact@coachrobb.com. You can address it to Dan or myself, and we'll get it to whoever you're addressing it to. And let's spread the word as a community. Health, wellness, then performance. So again, thank you so much for watching the show. Thank you for supporting the podcast. And if you need anything, please reach out. Thanks again.